The first cruel thing I heard that morning came from a boy in a varsity jacket, and it was aimed at a child who could not stand up to answer it. "Look at the little soldier," he said, loud enough for his friends to laugh. "He can't even march, he can't even stand." I had Theo's wheelchair angled toward the great iron gate, exactly where he wanted it, exactly where he had begged me to take him since the day we circled the date on the ward calendar. I am his nurse. My name is Renata Vance, and for 2 years I have measured my life in the small distances Theo can travel from the bed to the window, from the window to the courtyard, from the ward door to the elevator on a good day. The palace forecourt was the farthest he had ever asked to go, and the charity had made it possible. A clear June morning, a roped lane for families like ours, and 100 yards of polished cobblestone between us and the one man Theo had crossed a city to see. The guard stood his post in the shadow of the gatehouse, red wool tunic, tall black bearskin, white gloves folded over the rifle. He did not move. He did not look at the boys, and he did not look at us, and that stillness was the whole reason Theo loved him. "He's not real," one of the other boys said. "He's a statue, watch." The boy in the varsity jacket leaned over the rope and waved a hand in front of the guard's face, snapped his fingers. Nothing. He laughed and turned back to his friends, and I felt Theo's small hand find my sleeve and grip it, and I knew exactly what he was thinking before he said it. "They shouldn't do that," Theo whispered. "He's working. You're not supposed to bother a man who's working." That was Theo. 9 years old, 11 pounds lighter than he should have been, a thin oxygen line resting under his nose, and his first thought was for the discipline of a stranger. He had a folded paper on his lap that he had been guarding with both hands the whole car ride. He would not tell me what it was. He said it was for the guard, and that he would only give it to the guard, and that I was not allowed to peek. "They don't understand him," Theo said. "That's all, they think he can't hear them." But he can hear everything. That's the hardest part of his job. He hears everything and he doesn't move. I want to tell you that I knew how the day would end. I didn't. I knew only that my patient, a boy whose chart I am not allowed to read aloud, a boy whose good days had grown rare and short, had pinned the brightest hope of his year on a man in a fur cap who was paid, professionally, to ignore him. A woman with a clipboard came down the rope line. The charity had organized everything, a long table of pastries, a banner I won't describe because it had the fictional palace crest on it, volunteers in matching shirts. "Families with mobility needs can come to the front for the changing of the guard," she said. "There's a viewing spot saved at the gate." She smiled at Theo. "Are you excited?" He nodded so hard his oxygen line slipped, and I fixed it, and he didn't even notice me doing it because his eyes had not left the guard. But the boys in the varsity jackets had heard the front, and they did not like the idea of a kid in a wheelchair getting the front. "Why does he get to go up there?" the loud one said. "We've been here since 8. "Because he can't walk, genius," his friend said, and they all laughed again. And that was the second cruel thing, and it was worse than the first because it was true and they used it like a weapon. I am a nurse. I have learned over many years and many beds to keep my face calm when something inside me wants to come apart. I kept it calm. I put my hand on the push bar of Theo's chair and I said gently, "Let's go up to the front, sweetheart," and I started to wheel him past them. The loud boy stepped sideways, not all the way, just enough that the front wheel of Theo's chair had to stop or clip his shoe, a small thing, a cruelty the size of a shoe. "Watch where you're rolling," he said, smiling. And here is what I have learned to notice in a long career of watching people. The guard's eyes moved. Only his eyes, the smallest fraction, down the line across the rope to the boy's shoe and the small front wheel that had stopped against it, then back to the middle distance. If you had blinked, you would have missed it. I did not blink. I have spent 2 years learning to read the tiniest signals a body can give, because my patient cannot always tell me where it hurts, and so I read everyone all the time, and I read that guard the way I read a monitor. He had seen it, he had filed it away, and he had done the hardest thing a disciplined man can do, which is nothing. "Theo," I said, "don't worry about them. Look, they're getting ready." Because they were. A sergeant had appeared at the gatehouse, and there was a stir along the line, phones lifting in the crowd, and the loud boys lost interest in us the moment something louder came along. They drifted off toward the better view, and I wheeled Theo into the safe spot at the rope, close enough now that I could see the seams in the guard's white gloves and the faint rise and fall of his breathing. Theo went very quiet. He gets quiet when something matters most. He lifted the folded paper off his lap and held it against his chest with both hands, the way you hold something you've decided to be brave about. "Renata," he said, "what if he doesn't take it?" "Then he doesn't take it," I said, "and it isn't because of you. He's not allowed to take things while he's on his post. That's part of his job. Remember, you're the one who told me that." "But what if I never get to come back?" He said it lightly. That was the worst of it. He said it the way another child might say, "What if it rains?" And he kept his eyes on the guard the whole time, and I had no answer that was both honest and kind, so I gave him the kind one. "You'll come back," I said. "We'll come back as many times as you want." He nodded, and he believed me, because 9-year-olds believe the people who love them, and that is a debt you carry for the rest of your life. Then the drums began. I had never heard the changing of the guard in person, and nothing prepares you for the way the sound arrives in your chest before it reaches your ears. The column came down from the inner court in perfect time, boots striking stone as one boot, and the crowd's noise dropped away to nothing, and Theo's hand found my sleeve again, and he was not gripping it in fear this time. He was gripping it because something he had only ever seen on a small screen in a hospital room was happening in front of him, full-sized and real, close enough to touch, and his whole face had come open with it. "They're real," he breathed. "Renata, they're real." "They're real," I said. And the man at the gate, our guard, the one Theo had crossed a city for, turned his head a precise quarter and began the slow march to meet his relief. And as he turned, for 1/2 of 1 second, his eyes passed over the small boy at the rope holding a folded paper to his chest. I saw him see Theo. And I saw something in that flawless, unmoving face that I have spent the months since trying to name. The closest word I have is recognition, as if the guard had been waiting for this boy as long as this boy had been waiting for him. Then he was gone, marched off into the formation, and Theo turned to me with tears standing in his eyes and the biggest smile I had seen on him in a year. He looked at me, Theo said, "Renata." He looked right at me. I did not yet understand that the day had not even started. The formation halted. The relief took the post, a different man now, younger, taking up the same flawless stillness in the same shadow of the gatehouse, and the man Theo loved was carried away into the inner court with the rest of the column, and I felt my heart sink because I knew what Theo did not yet know. The guard he had come to see was off duty now, gone behind the wall. The paper in Theo's lap had no one to go to. But I have learned never to take hope away before it falls on its own, so I said nothing, and I wheeled Theo a little along the rope so the sun would not be in his eyes, and I let him watch the new guard and believe, for a while longer, that the morning still held everything he wanted. It was the boys who broke it. They came back when the drums stopped, because boys like that always come back. The crowd had thinned at our end of the rope. The show was over. The cameras were chasing the column up the forecourt, and the loud one in the varsity jacket spotted Theo's paper. "What's that then?" he said, leaning over the rope. "A love letter for your boyfriend." "Leave him alone," I said. I use the voice I use on the ward when a thing has gone too far. It usually works. It did not work on him. "I'm just asking," he said, all innocence, and he reached out and flicked the corner of Theo's paper with one finger. Theo snatched it to his chest. The boy laughed. "Relax, what is it? Show us." Is it a picture? Did you draw him a little picture? It's private, Theo said. His voice had gone small and steady, the way it does in the worst minutes on the ward when he decides to be brave because being afraid is not allowed. It's for the guard. He doesn't even know you exist, kid. The boy said it lazily, the way you'd swat a fly, not even cruel anymore, just careless, which is its own kind of cruel. They don't see anybody. They don't care about anybody. You waited all this time for a guy who didn't even blink at you. I will tell you the truth. That one landed. Not on me. On Theo. I saw it land. I saw the steadiness in his face slip for just a moment, and the question he had asked me at the rope, what if he doesn't take it, came back into his eyes, and I knew the boy had said out loud the exact fear Theo had been carrying all morning under the bravery, and there is no medicine for that. I stepped between them. I put my body between the rope and my patient, and I looked at the loud boy, and I did not raise my voice, because I have found that lowering it works better. He is 9 years old, I said, and he has had a harder year than you will have in your whole life. You can walk away from this rope any time you like. He came a very long way to be here. So you are going to leave him be, or I am going to find the woman with the clipboard, and you are going to spend your morning explaining yourself to your school. He rolled his eyes, but he stepped back and his friends pulled at his sleeve, half laughing, half uneasy now, and they moved off down the line, and I thought it was over. It was not over, because the new guard on the post had heard every word. I know he heard it because of what his hands did. The rifle had been resting against his shoulder in the regulation hold, white gloves still. And as the boy said, you waited all this time for a guy who didn't even blink at you, I saw the guard's gloved fingers tighten on the stock of the rifle. A small, controlled flex, knuckles rising under the white cotton, then releasing. The way a man clenches a fist and then makes himself open it. The way you hold something in when holding it in is the whole job. He did not look at the boys. He did not look at us. His eyes stayed forward on the middle distance, and his face stayed carved out of the same stone as before. But I am a nurse, and I read bodies for a living, and I will swear to you on my license that the man on that post wanted, with everything in him, to step off it and say something to a careless boy in a varsity jacket, and that the not doing it was costing him. Theo had not seen the guard's hands. He was looking at his paper. He had unfolded one corner of it and folded it back, checking on it, the way you check on something you love, and then he looked up at me, and his chin was doing the thing it does before he decides not to cry. He didn't even blink at me, Theo said quietly. The boy's right. I waited the whole time and he didn't even. Stop, I said, and I crouched down to his level, which is where I do my best work, because at his level I am not a tall adult looking down, I am just Renata. Listen to me. He did look at you. I saw it. I was watching his eyes the whole time, and his eyes came to you, and they stayed a half-second longer than they stayed on anything else in this whole forecourt. You don't believe me, I know. But I don't lie to you. Have I ever lied to you? No, he admitted. He saw you, I said. Now, do you still want to try to give him the paper? Theo looked at the new guard on the post. Then he looked toward the inner gate where his guard had disappeared. And he made a decision, and when Theo makes a decision, his whole small body settles into it, and he said, I'll wait. He has to come back out sometime. They do shifts. I read about it. I'll wait for him. So we waited. I bought him a hot chocolate he didn't drink and held it for him so the warmth would reach his hands, which are always cold now. I checked his line and his color the way I check them 100 times a day without him noticing. The June sun came around the gatehouse and warmed the cobbles, and the charity packed up its pastry table, and the crowd cycled through, new families, new tourists, new phones, and through all of it, the new guard stood his unbreaking post, and Theo watched him, and I watched Theo. And I thought about what the boy had said. They don't care about anybody. I had believed something close to that myself when we arrived. I had looked at that motionless figure and thought, he is a beautiful thing for a sick boy to look at, a living statue, a wish that costs nothing because it asks nothing back, a safe place to put a hope. I had not expected the statue to have a pulse I could read. I had not expected to see a grown man's gloved hand clench on a rifle. Because a careless teenager had wounded a child, he was forbidden to defend. Around noon, the woman with the clipboard came back. She knelt by Theo's chair. People do that with Theo. They go down to him. His stillness pulls them down the way the guards pulls everyone up, and she said, "I heard you came a long way to see the guard." "I did," Theo said. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said. "The guard you watched this morning, the one who marched off, he's not just any guardsman." She glanced up at me, and there was something careful in her face, something she was deciding whether to say. "There's a reason the charity matched your visit to his post today, but I'm not the one who should tell you. If you can wait a little longer, sweetheart, I think the rest of your day is going to be better than you imagined." Theo looked up at me with the whole question in his face. I had no idea what she meant, but I felt the morning turn under us like a tide, and I told him the truest thing I had. "Then we wait," I said. The afternoon is where I almost lost the day. It happened the way it always happens, not with a crash but with a quiet. Theo's color changed. I have a sense for it now that I cannot explain to anyone who hasn't lived beside a sick child. It is below thinking, a thing my hands know before my head does. His lips lost a little of their pink. His breathing climbed. He didn't complain because he never complains, and that is exactly what frightens me. Because by the time Theo says he isn't feeling well, we are already past the easy part. "Renata," he said, "I'm okay, I just want to wait." "I know you do." I had the small bag off the back of his chair already, checking his flow, counting his breaths against my watch without letting him see me count. "We're going to sit in the shade for a few minutes, that's all. The guard isn't going anywhere. Neither are we." I wheeled him into the cool of the gatehouse wall, out of the sun. And I did the small, careful things I am trained to do, and I watched the numbers. And for about 10 minutes I was not a woman at a charity event watching a beautiful ceremony. I was a nurse at the edge of a decision no one wants to make. How long is too long? When do I call it? When do I tell this child that the thing he crossed a city for is not worth what it is asking of his body? And the new guard on the post, the young one, watched too. I felt it before I saw it. That prickle on the back of the neck that tells you someone's attention has fixed on you. I looked up, and his eyes were forward as they had been all day, fixed on the middle distance, regulation, unbreaking. But his post faced us now, and I understood that a man trained to stand perfectly still for hours is also a man trained to see everything in front of him without ever appearing to look, and that he had seen the color leave a boy's face, and that some part of him was standing his post and holding a child's emergency in his attention at the same time. Then he did a thing so small I would have missed it if I were anyone else. He shifted his weight a fraction, the regulation easing of a long stand, and as he did, his head turned a precise few degrees, not toward us but toward the gatehouse arch, toward the inner court. A signal, not to us, to someone inside. 90 seconds later a woman in a charity shirt came out at a fast walk with a folding chair, and a bottle of water and a first aid kit she didn't need because I had my own. And behind her, unhurried, came an older man in a different uniform, not the ceremonial red, a plainer dark one with a sergeant's bearing in gray at his temples, and he crouched by Theo's chair the way everyone crouched by Theo's chair, and he said, "Easy, lad. We've got you. There's no rush in the world. You take the time you need." "I'm okay," Theo said, because he is always okay. "I just got tired." "Tired's allowed," the sergeant said. "I get tired standing there myself. Don't tell anyone." And Theo, who had spent the morning being mocked by boys his own age, laughed. A small, breathy laugh, but a real one, and his color came up a fraction with it, because the body and the heart are not separate things, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never watched a sick child be made to feel safe. The sergeant stayed with us. He had that gift some old soldiers have of being completely calm in a way that makes the air around them calmer too. He asked Theo about himself, not about the sickness, never about the sickness, but about everything else. What he liked, what he wanted to be. And Theo, between careful breaths, told him, a guard. He wanted to be a guard. He knew he couldn't be, because of his legs, because of everything. But if he could be anything, he would stand at a gate and protect people, and never move no matter what anybody said to him. The sergeant did not say, "Oh, you could never do that." He did not say that gentle, dismissing thing adults say. He looked at Theo for a long moment, and then he said something I have turned over in my mind 100 times since. "Son," he said, "do you know what the hardest part of standing that gate actually is? It isn't the cold, it isn't the weight of the kit. It's the part where somebody says something cruel right in front of you and you are not permitted to answer it. Standing still while a fool runs his mouth, that takes more from a man than any drill. You sat here this morning and a boy said cruel things to you and you didn't shout back. You didn't cry where he could see, you held it. I watched you do it." He nodded slowly. "That's the job, lad, the actual job. You already know how to do the hardest part. The marching's nothing next to that." I had to turn away and look at the cobblestones for a moment. It was then that the boys came back for the third time. I had thought we were done with them. We were not, because some people will not leave a thing alone until it costs them, and the loud one in the varsity jacket had clearly stewed on being talked down to by a nurse, and he had come back with his courage propped up by his friends and by an audience of new tourists who didn't know the story. "Oh look, he's still here," he announced. "Still waiting for his statue. Hey kid, newsflash, he went home, they swapped them out. The one you wanted, gone. You waited all day for nothing." And Theo, who was tired, who had been gently brought back from the edge of a bad afternoon, who had a folded paper on his lap that he had guarded for hours, Theo's face crumpled. But the sergeant rose. He did not hurry. He stood up to his full height between the boy and the chair, and he did not raise his voice, and somehow that was worse for the boy than shouting would have been. "Young man," the sergeant said, "you've come back to this rope 3 times to be cruel to a sick child. I've watched you do it. So have a great many people with cameras. Now I'm going to give you the kindest thing anyone will give you today, which is one chance to walk away before I find out which school you're from and have a very long conversation with the people responsible for you. Do you understand me?" The boy understood him. The friends were already backing away. And the loud one, who had been so brave with a 9-year-old, had nothing at all for a calm old soldier, and he went, and this time he did not come back. The sergeant sat back down by Theo's chair as if nothing had happened. "Now," he said, "where were we? You were telling me about that paper you won't let anyone see." Theo's hands tightened on it. "It's for the guard," he said, "the real one. The one from this morning." The sergeant and the woman with the clipboard exchanged a look over Theo's head, that careful look again, the one that knew something we didn't, and the sergeant said, very gently, "Then I think it's time somebody told you about the guard you came to see. Can you hold on a little longer, son? Because he's going to want to give you something too." Theo nodded. Of course he nodded. He would have held on through anything for this. The sergeant settled onto the folding chair so he was at Theo's level, and he told it plainly, the way old soldiers tell true things, no flourishes, because the thing itself was enough. "The man you watched march off this morning," he said, "he has stood that gate longer than most, 11 years. And before the gate he was somewhere else entirely. He was a medic, frontline. The man whose job it was to run toward the worst thing on the worst day and keep someone's son alive long enough to come home. He carried boys not much older than you out of places I won't describe, and some of them lived because of him, and some of them didn't, and he carries all of that under that red tunic same as he carries the rifle." The sergeant paused. "He doesn't talk about it. He took the gate when his service ended because, he told me once, it was the only work he could find where standing perfectly still and protecting people was the whole job, where nobody bled. He needed a post where nobody bled for a while. I felt my throat close. I thought of the gloved hand clenching on the rifle when the boy was cruel. A man who had carried the dying and now stood a gate where no one was supposed to be hurt, and a careless teenager had stood at his rope and hurt a child right in front of him, and he had not been permitted to move. "Why him?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. Why did the charity match Theo's visit to his post today specifically? The woman with the clipboard answered this time. "Because 3 months ago we wrote to the regiment," she said. "We do it for our children who have a particular wish. Most go unanswered, and that's all right, we never promise. But one came back." One guardsman wrote back himself. She looked at Theo with a tenderness that told me she had read his file, the one I am not allowed to read aloud. He asked which day. He asked the child's name. He requested this post, this gate, this morning. He's the reason there was a safe spot at the rope for you, sweetheart. He arranged it. He just wasn't allowed to tell you while he was standing his duty. Theo had gone completely still. The good kind of still, this time. The kind where a child is so full he cannot find the edges of what he's feeling. "He knows my name," Theo whispered. "He's known it for 3 months, the sergeant said." And Theo turned to me, and I will not be able to describe his face for the rest of my life, because there are some expressions that don't survive being put into words, and that was one. The face of a boy who has spent a long, hard year being looked past, being a chart and a condition and a brave little patient. Suddenly learning that a man he idolized had learned his name months ago, and crossed the machinery of an entire institution to stand at one specific gate on one specific morning, so that a sick boy could see him. "Renata," he said, "he picked us." "He picked you," I said. The afternoon had moved on while we talked. The light had gone gold and long across the forecourt, the way June light does in the late hours, laying the shadows of the gilded railings out across the cobblestones. The crowd had thinned to the patient few, and I became aware of a stir at the inner gate, the same stir I'd felt that morning before the drums, a tightening of the air, an order passed somewhere I couldn't see. The sergeant stood. He straightened his plain, dark uniform with the flat of his hands, and something in his bearing changed, became formal, became ready, and he said, "Now then, I think he's coming off his rest. Renata, would you bring Theo up to the gate, right up to the rope at the front where he wanted to be this morning? There's something the lad's earned." I wheeled Theo forward. His hands were shaking now, not from the cold and not from his condition, but from the sheer size of what was happening to him, and he clutched the folded paper to his chest. And I positioned his chair exactly at the rope at the front of the gate, exactly where he had begged me to take him at the start of a day that had tried so hard to break him. And the gate opened. Not the great public gate, a smaller one set in the iron, the kind the guardsmen use. And through it in the gold of the late sun came the man Theo had crossed a city to see. Red wool tunic, brass buttons catching the light, white gloves, the tall black bearskin. He came off his rest and onto the forecourt, and he was, for the first time all day, not standing a post. He was free to move. And he walked measured, unhurried, but walking. A man and not a statue, straight across the polished stone toward a boy in a wheelchair at the rope. The few people left in the forecourt went quiet. Phones came up. But it was a different quiet than the mornings. Not the hush before a spectacle, but the hush that falls when grown strangers all realize at once that they are about to witness something that matters. He stopped a few feet from the rope, and for a moment, one long moment, the guard and the boy simply looked at each other. The man who had carried the dying and needed a post where no one bled. The boy who wanted nothing in the world but to stand a gate and never move. I do not know everything that passed between them in that look. But I know that Theo's mouth opened and nothing came out, and I know that the guard's flawless, disciplined face, the face that had not moved for a careless boy or a clenching fist or an entire morning of cruelty, did something at last. His eyes went bright. The man did not speak yet. He reached up slowly and unfastened the strap beneath his chin, and he lifted the tall bearskin from his head and held it under his arm. And bareheaded in the gold light, he looked younger and older at once, an ordinary man with gray starting at his temples and a soldier's steadiness in his eyes. And he took one step closer to the rope, and another. And then in front of the gate, in front of the thinning crowd, in front of the gilded railings and the long shadows, and a sergeant standing at quiet attention, and a nurse who had forgotten how to breathe. The King's Guard, the man who was trained never to bend, began to lower himself down. He was getting onto one knee. For Theo. Renata, Theo whispered, and his voice broke clean in half. Renata, what's he? The guard went down onto one knee on the cobblestones. He did it the way he did everything, with control, with care, deliberate and unhurried, the white glove going briefly to the stone to steady himself, the red tunic folding at the knee. And then he was down, kneeling on the cold cobbles of the palace forecourt, so that his eyes were level with the eyes of a boy in a wheelchair, the way I crouched to Theo's level, the way the sergeant had, the way everyone who truly sees Theo eventually does, except that this man was not allowed to. This man had broken something to do it. 11 years of a discipline that does not bend, set down on one knee in front of a sick child, and I understood that I was watching a man choose, in front of witnesses and cameras and his own institution, to honor a boy over a rule. For a moment neither of them said anything. They were eye to eye now, the guard and the boy, and the late sun lit both their faces, and the whole forecourt held its breath. Then the guard spoke. His voice was low and even, a soldier's voice, but it had something underneath it that he was holding very carefully in place. Theo, he said, I've been waiting 3 months to meet you. I'm sorry I couldn't say so this morning. When I'm on the gate, I'm not permitted to, but I'm off the gate now. A pause, and a man who isn't on the gate is allowed to come and shake the hand of someone he admires. He admires. He did not say someone who admires him. He turned it around. He put it the only way that would let Theo keep his dignity, and he held out his white-gloved hand across the rope. Theo could not speak. He reached out his small, cold, shaking hand, and he put it in the guard's, and the guard closed his big hand around it gently, the way you hold something you have decided to protect, and he shook it once, the way you shake the hand of an equal, of a man, of a soldier. I heard what happened this morning, the guard said quietly. I heard there were some who thought you didn't belong at this rope, so I want to tell you something, and I want you to remember it because I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean. He leaned in a fraction. Of everyone who stood at this gate today, you were the only one who understood what we actually do. You knew not to bother a man who was working. You knew the hardest part of the job is holding still when something cruel is said. You held still through worse than most grown men could. I watched you do it, and the sergeant watched you do it, and we have stood that gate a long time, and we know what we saw. His voice dropped lower. You've got the discipline, son. The body's only part of it, and it was never the important part. You've got the part that matters. You'd have made a fine guardsman. That was when Theo remembered the paper. He had been holding it crushed to his chest the whole time. Now, with his free hand, with the guard still holding the other, he held it out. I made this for you, he said, the words coming in a rush of held breath. I drew it. In the hospital, it's you, standing at the gate. I wanted to give you something, but I didn't have anything to give, so I made it, and I didn't think you'd take it. The boy said you wouldn't take it, but... I'll take it, the guard said. I'll take it and I'll keep it, and I'll tell you exactly where it's going to go. He let go of Theo's hand and took the folded paper in both of his white gloves, and he opened it with a care I have only ever seen people use on things that are precious, and he looked at it for a long time. I could see it over his shoulder, a child's drawing in colored pencil, a red guardsman at an iron gate, careful and crooked and made with everything a 9-year-old had. The guard looked at it, and his jaw worked once, and the bright in his eyes spilled over at last, one line down a disciplined face, and he did not wipe it away, and he did not look away from the drawing to hide it. "There's a wall," he said when he could, "in the room where we wait between our shifts. The men put up the things that matter to them, photographs, letters, things from home." He refolded the drawing along its careful creases exactly as Theo had folded it, and he tucked it inside his red tunic over his heart, where soldiers carry the things they will not lose. "This is going on that wall, Theo, at eye level, where every man going out to stand that gate will see it. And when they ask who drew it, and they will ask, I'm going to tell them about the bravest visitor this gate has had in 11 years. Then the guard rose. He came up off his knee the way he had gone down, controlled, unhurried, and he settled the tall bearskin back onto his head and fastened the strap beneath his chin, and the soldier closed back over the man like a door, and he stepped back from the rope, and he came to full attention in front of Theo's wheelchair. And the KingsGuard saluted the boy. A full salute, sharp and perfect, the white glove rising to the brim, held a long beat, longer than protocol, longer than ceremony, held until there could be no mistaking what it was. A guardsman of 11 years, rendering the honor of his office to a 9-year-old boy in a wheelchair on the cobblestones of the forecourt, in the gold of the falling sun, in front of everyone. I heard people crying behind me. I was one of them. And Theo, who could not stand, who had been told all morning that he did not belong, who had crossed a city on the strength of a hope that cost nothing and asked nothing. Theo lifted his thin right arm with everything he had and brought his small cold hand up to his own brow and returned the salute. 2 soldiers, one at attention in red wool, one in a wheelchair with an oxygen line, holding their salutes across an iron rope in the last light of a June afternoon. I have been a nurse for 22 years. I have seen the best and the worst of what people do to one another in the rooms where it matters most. I had never, until that moment, seen anyone give my patient back the one thing his illness had quietly taken without anyone naming it. Not his health, no one could give him that, but his standing. His dignity as a person and not a condition. A man who was forbidden to move had moved, and broken his discipline, and gotten down on the cold stone, to tell a dismissed and mocked little boy that he was seen, that he was admired, that he belonged at the front of that rope more than anyone, and then had honored him as an equal in front of the world. The guard finished his salute and lowered his hand. Theo lowered his. And the boy was smiling and weeping at once, and so was I, and so was the woman with the clipboard, and the old sergeant stood at quiet attention with his chin high and his eyes wet and unashamed. We did go back. I promised Theo at the rope that morning that we would come back as many times as he wanted, and we kept that promise for as long as we had, and every time the guard found a way to be on the gate, and every time, as he marched past the boy in the wheelchair at the rope, his eyes would come to Theo and stay a half-second longer than they stayed on anything else in the forecourt, the only sign he was permitted to give, and the only one Theo ever needed. The drawing is still on the wall in the waiting room behind the gate. I have been told it is still at eye level, where every man going out to stand his post sees it, and that they still ask who drew it, and that the answer is still given the way the guard promised it would be given. Theo wanted, more than anything, to be a man who stood at a gate and protected people, and never moved no matter what anyone said. He believed he never could be, because of his legs, because of everything. But I was there. I watched a boy hold his composure through cruelty no grown man should have to bear, and I watched the most disciplined man I have ever seen break protocol and kneel to tell him that holding still through pain is the whole of the job, and the part that mattered Theo already had. He stood that gate in the only way that ever counted. And a KingsGuard knelt, and then saluted to say so.